What if an ordinary man suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and whispered a name, his own? But from another life? What if the recurring dreams weren't signs of a mental disorder, but memories of a death that was never forgiven? And what if the man who killed him long ago was still alive, in a different body, a different name, but with the same unchanging eyes? This is not a typical story of revenge. This is the journey of a soul that refused to let go until the truth is revealed and karma is returned. Are you ready to enter a life that never truly ended? Not all wounds die with the body. Some souls only begin to live after death. Daniel Pierce was never a man of mysticism. 36 years old, mechanical engineer, lived alone in a modest apartment in Wyoming. Logical, efficient, reliable, the kind of man who trusted patterns, physics, and paperwork. Until the dreams started. They came like whispers, brief flashes in the middle of the night. A forest drenched in mist. The deafening echo of a gunshot. A man screaming, not in fear, but in betrayal. And a final, chilling word shouted before everything went black. Elias. He woke up gasping, heart racing, hands clenched. Daniel didn't know an Elias. He didn't know that forest. And yet, some part of him did. At first, he ignored it. Nightmares, he thought. Maybe stress. A product of too many hours at the drafting table and not enough sleep. But the dreams continued and worsened. He began waking at exactly 3:12 a.m. every night, without fail. The same scene, the same voice. And then one night, it changed. He saw his own face, not the one he knew in the mirror, but a different version of himself, older, sharper, clothed in a 1920s wool coat, running through the trees. And this time, he didn't just hear the name. He spoke it. My name was Elias Kane, and I died because of him. Daniel sat bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat. The name Elias felt like something pulled from inside his bones. He stood up, stared into the mirror, and whispered, "I've been here before." A few days later, Daniel began to write everything down. The trees, the clothes, the gunshot, the sensation of blood pooling under his ribs, the betrayal. But there was more. He began seeing flashes while awake, brief but visceral. He was in a town he'd never visited, standing in front of a red-bricked home with a wooden porch. He saw a woman with curled hair and pale gloves, a silver pocket watch with the initials EK, and a man, tall, laughing, with a scar on his left cheek. None of it made sense. Until it did. One afternoon, while flipping through an old box of postcards at a local flea market, Daniel's hand froze. There it was. A photo of a town labeled Bellwood 1921, with the same red brick home, identical down to the shape of the columns and the small ivy growing up the side. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. He wasn't just dreaming. He was remembering. That night, he searched online archives. Bellwood, Montana, a town nearly forgotten, absorbed into a nearby county in the 1950s. Population never exceeded 600. Logging town, remote, cold, quiet. He found census records, old photos. Then, on a digitized newspaper reel dated November 1923, he found something that made his blood run cold. Local man Elias Kane found dead in northern forest. Authorities rule incident as accident during hunting. Friend Thomas K. reports last seen alive at dawn. Thomas K. The name pulled something sharp from deep within him. Daniel's hands trembled. The face from his dreams, the man with the scar, the laugh, the betrayal, it was him. In that moment, Daniel Pierce, mechanical engineer, logical man of science, knew the truth. He had lived before. He had been killed. And the man who betrayed him was still out there. Not in the same name. Not in the same face. But the soul? The soul never forgets what it owes. The next morning, Daniel didn't go to work. He packed a bag, printed every record he found, and booked a train to Montana. Not for curiosity, but for something older, something heavier. He was not just remembering. He was returning. Some enemies don't die with the past. They change names, change faces, but their debt follows them through every life. The train rolled into Bellwood, Montana with a deep, metallic groan, a town forgotten by time. The streets were quiet. Old brick storefronts leaned under decades of snow and wind. The forest loomed nearby, the same forest from Daniel's dreams. He He stepped off the platform not as a visitor, but as a soul returning to a battlefield. The first thing he did was walk. No map, no GPS, just his instinct. Within 15 minutes, he found it, a narrow path at the edge of town. Oak trees curling overhead like watchful sentinels. At the end, the house from his vision. Red bricks, wooden porch, ivy climbing the side. Exactly as he remembered, but older. Worn, like a memory fraying at the edges. He didn't knock, he didn't go in. He simply stood on the sidewalk, staring, breath caught in his chest. His body was here for the first time. But his soul? His soul had never left. Later, at the local library, Daniel began searching the physical archives. Newspapers, obituaries, public records. He needed to find Thomas K., the man from 1923 who had reported Elias Kane missing. The paper was clear. Elias had died in a hunting accident. But the name Thomas Kane only appeared once. Too convenient, too perfect. Then, buried in a stack of 1970s property records, Daniel found something strange. A deed signed by Richard T. Coleman, who had purchased Elias Kane's land in 1974. Coleman. The name meant nothing, but the T in the middle? It hit like a whisper from the grave. T equals Thomas. Daniel found a photo in the town's Historical Society exhibit. It was from a 1980s veterans event. In the back row stood a man in his 60s. Upright, sharp-jawed, and on his left cheek, barely visible under the grayscale grain, a small, curved scar. Daniel dropped the frame. He asked around. Eventually, a woman at the post office told him, Richard Coleman? He still lives out on Cedar Lane. Old man now. Keeps to himself. You won't get much out of him. Daniel thanked her. He didn't need much. He only needed a look into his eyes. That evening, Daniel stood outside a weather-worn cottage on Cedar Lane. The windows flickered with warm yellow light. Curtains moved slightly. Someone was home. He took a breath, walked to the door, knocked. Footsteps. Then, the door creaked open. Standing before him was a man in his 80s. Thin, hair white, wrinkles deep, but the eyes, sharp. Gray-blue, alive with something old. The man blinked slowly, and said, I've been expecting you. Daniel's heart stopped. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The man stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the room was filled with quiet. No TV, no music, just the sound of a fireplace crackling. Daniel sat. Richard Coleman, or whoever he once was, didn't ask Daniel's name. He didn't need to. You remember it, don't you? The old man said. The woods, the blood, the betrayal. Daniel nodded. His voice finally returned. You were Thomas Kane. You left me to die. Richard looked into the fire. I did more than that, he said softly. I pulled the trigger. I told myself it was business. That the land was worth more than our friendship. That no one would care. He turned to Daniel. But I cared. Every day since. I dreamed of your face for decades before I even knew your name again. Silence. Then Daniel asked, Why now? Why me? Why do we remember? Richard breathed, slow and deep. Because memory isn't in the brain. It's in the soul. You came back because I never paid my debt. And you never let go. Daniel stood. He could feel the pulse in his hands, the old rage. The ancient hurt, crawling back up from a grave neither of them could escape. He walked to the old man. Looked into those eyes. Then, he didn't strike him. He didn't shout. He reached out, and placed his hand on the man's shoulder. You remember. And so do I. That's enough. Richard's eyes welled with tears. For the first time in nearly a century, in one life or the next, Elias Kane and Thomas Kane stood together again, not as enemies, but as souls ready to let go. That night, Daniel walked back through the forest, beneath the same stars under which he had once bled and died. But this time, he wasn't chased, he wasn't afraid, and he didn't dream. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, his soul was quiet. Revenge is loud, but redemption is quiet, and sometimes, the soul returns not to punish, but to remember who it really is. Daniel stood at the edge of Bellwood's northern forest, where the wind whispered through pine needles like a language only the soul could understand. The leaves crunched beneath his boots as he walked deeper into the trees, no longer running, no longer dreaming, no longer haunted. He had come here to face the man who betrayed him in a past life. And he had. But what he hadn't expected was how light he would feel afterward. Not victorious, not vindicated, just free. The forest looked different now. It no longer pulsed with shadows or blood-stained echoes. It was still, sacred, as if the land, too, had waited for this reckoning. Daniel paused near a clearing, the same one he'd seen again and again in his sleep. Where Elias Cain had fallen. Where a bond of trust had been broken with gunpowder and greed. He knelt down and placed his hand on the cold soil. "This is where it ended," he whispered. "And now, this is where it ends again, for good." That night, Daniel stayed in a small rented cabin on the edge of town. He lit a single candle, placed it beside the bed, and wrote in his journal for the first time in years. He didn't write about Elias or Thomas. He didn't need to retell what had already been lived twice. Instead, he wrote about karmic loops, about unfinished pain, about how the universe has a way of tying souls together, letting them spin, again and again, until one of them finally chooses to untangle the thread. "I thought I came back for revenge," he wrote, "but I came back for release." In the days that followed, Daniel noticed something strange. The headaches that had plagued him since he was a teenager were gone. His persistent insomnia, gone. The gnawing feeling of being out of place in this life, silenced. It was as if a piece of him had been restored, not from something added, but from something finally let go. He returned to Wyoming a different man. He didn't tell anyone what happened in Bellwood. Not his coworkers, not his therapist, not even the friend who always joked about reincarnation like it was a Netflix fantasy. Some stories aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be felt. And this story? It didn't belong to Daniel Pierce. Or Elias Cain. It belonged to the soul that lived through them both. Weeks passed. Then months. One morning, Daniel walked past a bookstore downtown and noticed a display in the window. Karmic Memory and the Return of the Soul, a lecture series by a spiritual author. He smiled. He didn't go in. He didn't need to. That night, Daniel sat on his apartment floor, cross-legged, candle burning. He closed his eyes, not to search for the past, but to thank it. He thought of Richard Coleman, the man who had once been Thomas. He didn't hate him. He didn't pity him. He simply understood him now. Forgiveness, he realized, isn't for the other person. It's the moment when the soul drops the stone it's carried through lifetimes and says, "This doesn't belong to me anymore." Daniel whispered one last thing into the quiet room. "Whatever comes next, I'll walk into it lighter." And in that moment, something shifted in the air, not dramatic, not loud, just a soft loosening. As if the very thread that tied him to vengeance unraveled and floated away like smoke. No nightmares, no visions, no more names from the past. Just peace. Epilogue. The unfinished are the ones who return. Some souls return because their story isn't over. Others return because someone else's is. But a few, like Daniel, come back because a truth was buried, and the heart needed to remember what the mind had forgotten. Not to seek revenge, but to find peace on the other side of pain. If you believe that the soul carries memory across lifetimes, if you've ever had dreams that felt like echoes, if you've met someone whose eyes felt too familiar, maybe you, too, are here to finish something. Subscribe for more soul-stirring stories about reincarnation, karma, and the lives that live within us, even when we forget. Because the truth is, the soul never forgets. It only waits for the right moment to remember.